Hey, Leaders Lab alumni, how are you doing? I'm Brian Gillooly. I'm the content director for the AFCOM Leaders Labs, and you can see that joining me today is Bill Kleyman. He is the Director of Technology Solutions for EPAM Systems, and he was our Leaders Lab advisor for our session in Dallas on DSIM and management software. And Bill, you are the lucky person who is our first guest in the LinkedIn group, Leaders Lab Advisors. We decided we're going to start with you and just get a follow-up from you about the Leaders Lab that you conducted. And my first question for you, Bill, is there anything new to update beyond what we discussed at Leaders Lab, or is there anything that you want to emphasize that we did talk about that the alumni should really take to heart?
So, as far as anything new, we had a couple conversations with the team. First of all, thanks for having me on, and the AFCOM people watching this, thanks for having me, and I appreciate it. And you guys are an amazing team to work with. It was fun. We got a lot of really great insight, and thanks for letting me go first too. Way to set the bar somewhere. I don't know where you said it, but you certainly said it somewhere.
Yep.
So as far as anything new is concerned, there was a conversation that after we wrote our Leaders Lab report, along the lines of, when you talk about creating team members that help manage data center operations, and I found this one really, really great. Don't just let them be names on a piece of paper. The only way you can successfully manage a data center and an entire ecosystem is if you actually have real stakeholders and real participants in that kind of architecture. And the other big thing that I think was a follow-up to our conversation was we talked about DSIM deployments. And what was really interesting is we started to give out some timelines as far as what DSIM looks like, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks. And our team came back, you guys came back and said, Bill, that's unrealistic. Every data center is malleable. It's different, right? It's going to have different expectations. And so to that extent, you need to set realistic DSIM expectations. And a part of that is understanding that data center infrastructure management is not set in stone. It's a fluid approach to data center infrastructure management in general. And even integration with things like smart data centers, smart racks, smart PDUs, all of these things that are given a digital life, you have to take into account that your own management systems are going to continuously change and evolve. So as opposed to saying a typical DSIM deployment might take 6 weeks or something, you just can't say that anymore. Maybe just to get started, maybe just to do a POC, but sort of in general, as you move along, that's certainly going to change. So I think a big part of the takeaway, and something new to consider, is the fluidity of your data center, integration with digital systems, and the way that impacts management overall. And the other big thing is share your knowledge and expertise with key stakeholders. And the big point there, what you guys told me, was that these guys can't just be names on a piece of paper. They need to be active participants. They need to be people who really give feedback and thoughts about data center management, how this impacts the business potentially, what there needs to be added, any reports that might need to be in there as well. I think a part of that was the CEO executive dashboard, for example. It doesn't have to be a CEO, like a management executive dashboard. And then from that perspective, allowing these managers to see what their data center is doing, how it can impact their operations, and really how it's an engine that fuels their business, not just a cost center, for example.
Yeah. In fact, that I remember that part of the discussion too. It was not just when we say CEO dashboard, like you said, any sort of approach to giving them the information they need to make their decisions, but also you were talking about that from the standpoint of funding DSIM in the first place. That you've got to speak to their level or their language, communicate as they do in order to be able to even get funding for DSIM technology in the first place, right?
And that's really funny you mentioned that, Brian. One of the questions, I think, what keeps you up at night, right? It's the gremlins that crawl around the data center floor, and if you got raised floors, you're going to be right underneath. So, I think the big thing for the executive is what keeps you up at night: the expected life of the data center, the ROI of the data center, interrupted service delivery. That's really scary for the executive because, just think about all the things that impacts, right? Not just an outage and costs of that, but also, image, what happens to the customer, and so on. But there's other concerns as well. Executives care about regulatory requirements. They care about the cost of running this data center. They care about How do you measure the performance of this thing by actually putting numerical value behind it? Just because it's up and running doesn't mean that it's bringing you value, right? You have to show that value. And then here's the secret to the IT and data center people out there. That's how you get money. That's how you get more budget dollars to do really cool and interesting things like, enhancing the smartness of your data center, for example, and making it even more efficient.
Yeah, I was going to say, even better. We talked a little bit in the Leaders Lab about the impact of AI and machine learning on DSIM and improving the ability to be more predictive about things as well. So, when you talked earlier about the timeline for this, and let's be realistic. Once we got into that conversation about AI and machine learning, I think a few of the folks in the Leaders Lab were saying, well, hold on a second before we get too far ahead of ourselves. But still, I do think it's something that they need to be keeping their eyes on for optimal use of DSIM.
So I agree with you 100%. There was research done by the 451 group that talked about the 5 levels of DCIM maturity, and that's the basic one where you have really minimal integration, just pretty basic function monitoring. Then you have reactive, right? So something's happened, you're able to adjust maybe cooling to demand, for example. Then you have proactive that, you have a data center equipment characteristics, you're able to understand where there's environmental usage to reduce risk. And there's optimizing, and then there's self-optimizing and autonomic. That's that future sort of next level state. Not everybody is there yet. The good news is we didn't glaze anybody over, and you guys had some really interesting feedback because we all agree on a couple of really basic elements when it comes to data center in the world we live in. We are in a data-driven world. We are becoming a part of the digital economy. The data center is becoming much more intelligent and much smarter with integrated systems, IP addresses, digital architectures, and so on. And by the way, as you're listening to this, it doesn't matter if you're a facilities person, if you're an electrician, if you're somebody who focuses on airflow management, you're going to see the impacts of digital systems on what you do every single day. Don't hide from it. Embrace it. In fact, you could actually make this entire architecture a part of what you do and a lot better. I mean, the future of DSIM and data center management will be more self-optimizing, more autonomic, and certainly an environment that's a lot more proactive.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate that. I really love how you're speaking to the alumni, almost on a personal basis, because it really does feel that way. Once we're on site at some of these things and the conversations they share, their best practices, all that sort of stuff, it really makes it an intimate and fun conversation. So the last question I have for you, and then I'm going to put you on the spot with one more little request at the very end, but
sure.
What about people who have not attended a Leaders Lab or have not attended this Leaders Lab on DSIM? Is there a parting word you might want to say to them? Because some people will come to this and want to check out some of the other Leaders Labs they didn't attend. Is there a parting point you'd like to make to them in terms of more, gaining more knowledge about DSIM?
Sure. If you didn't attend, we missed you, and that's okay. Maybe we'll see you next time, or certainly be sure to stop by Data Center World this year. We're going to have all these fun conversations moving forward. Data center infrastructure management, there's a market definition for it, right? It's the ability to collect, manage data around data center assets, resources, use, operational status throughout the entire data center lifecycle. I challenge everybody to really pause for a second and see the data center itself from a much bigger, broader perspective as a fluid, I say this hesitantly, but almost living entity that continues to morph with the business, which also brings us to the concept of there's a market definition, but there's also a business definition around what we're trying to accomplish, and where the goal of DSIM becomes agility, redundancy through controlling costs and improving efficiency. So for everyone who didn't maybe attend potentially and you're trying to learn more, there's a lot of really great information out there around DSIM. Obviously, follow AFCOM, ASCA, about our reports. Make sure you read those as well. But also understand that the data center is a part of the business, kind of like HR and marketing departments, for example. It's providing an organizational critical service, and that's really important to understand. Any company and any organization that works in a silo and tries to, break off these parts of the, the entire ecosystem is going to see challenges, right? Challenges around growth, challenges around potentially resiliency, impacting a digital market, and so on. So my one fleeting thought, if you didn't attend, make sure you do think about the data center from a broader perspective. Do a lot of research. Know that sometimes navigating the DSIM map is more challenging than the Chicago subway. You can do the New York subway as well. But you have to do it. You have to understand where these kinds of architectures fit in. A lot of times it feels like every single data center partner and vendor has their own DSIM solution. But that's not to say that you can't look outside of that bubble, make sure that it impacts your business well, and know that there are some really amazing, powerful concepts that are being wrapped around data center management.
Excellent. Thank you. So here's the on-the-spot question.
Oh, boy.
I haven't talked to you about this yet, but we want to revisit DSIM as a topic for Leaders Labs next year. Would you like to be a part of that, Bill?
Oh, way to put me on the spot.
Well, let's do this. Instead of putting you on the spot, let's say you and I will talk about it offline. But I do think from what everyone has seen here so far and some of the points you've been making and discussion and whatnot, that you are really an excellent advisor for this Leaders Lab. So we'll leave it at that.
I appreciate it, and let's do a preemptive yes to this. It was a pleasure. Listen, you guys, it's a half a day, a little bit more. We have a chance to sit together, talk together. These Leaders Labs are honestly one of my favorite things to do because I don't have to just get up there and talk for an hour or 30, 40 minutes. I get a chance to talk a little bit and then interact with you guys and learn from you. I got a chance to learn about some amazing new roles and positions that are the people that help coordinate conversations between facilities and IT professionals, right? There's literally somebody who translates the language between these two folks, and they are critical to the business and the entire management architecture. Plus, I learned that you guys think there might be drones flying around data centers a little bit later. That was a fun one. I was a little bit impressed. Thanks for that. But overall, Brian and team, everybody listening, it was a pleasure. I absolutely look forward to doing this again with you and talking about some really cool advanced concepts.
Excellent. Bill, thanks for joining us on our first Leaders Lab LinkedIn group webinar. So we appreciate it.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right.